And so what we see happening today is we look at these different axes and we see the idea of reach versus control. And all across the world, in all the markets that I go to, this kind of conversation is really starting to happen. The idea of we have maximum reach, but we still want to have control. And that's not always necessary. And that's not always possible. So we look at this, we have owned content. This is our companies, organizations are creating more content than ever before. This is the content that we own on our websites, on our blogs, etc. We own that content. We have a lot of control over that content, but it doesn't always have a lot of reach. How many of you work for a business-to-business company? All right. How many of you have a blog? All right. Now, how is one of your goals to get that blog read more? Of course. But it's not exactly easy, is it? No. So we look at a challenge there of trying to get people to look at our owned content. So then we have paid content. Well, that's traditional advertisement, banner ads, emails, marketing, etc. But we have a little bit more control over it, and it has a little bit more, a little less control over it, but it has a little bit more reach. However, we don't have control, say if we take an advertisement in the newspaper, in a magazine, etc., even a banner ad, we don't necessarily have control over what it's surrounding. So what happens if you take out that advertisement and that article that it's up against actually is something that is negative to your company? We don't have so much control. We have a little bit more reach, but is that really an engaged reach? Versus earned. We have a lot less control over that, but we have a whole lot more to gain. So we think about that control versus reach, that earned, paid, owned content. We are starting to see a shift that's happening where those three circles are starting to come more and more together. So as we see that happening, we look at the traditional marketing funnel. You know, traditional marketing, we've got our eyeballs, we're trying to raise awareness, we're trying to get people to move along that path, right? To consideration, loyalty, and then, of course, to those people who are buying our products and services. But today, unfortunately, the traditional marketing funnel doesn't look like this anymore. And now it looks a lot more like this. It's gotten very convoluted. It's gotten very challenging to figure out what's causing people to raise that awareness and where people go along those paths to where they become buyers, but today even they become contributors. So we've created this sort of maze or network here. And so that sphere of influence, if we're looking at that idea of who is that brand advocate that we're trying to create, and look at all the different things that affect that person, their friends, their family, their messages that are coming in and the messages that are going out, that sphere of influence, well, today the more marketing funnel looks a little bit more like this, to capture, to nurture, to take all of those pieces of social media and those different influences and try to capture all those different things to find out who is that center of influence, who is that advocate, how we can go and create more of those advocates. But we have to know how to reach those people so we can start the awareness process. And today that's harder than ever. The problem is today we're often thinking about our media as two separate things, digital versus traditional. Now, I go to a lot of agencies, digital agencies, PR agencies, marketing agencies, advertising agencies, and in fact, there are whole agencies that are all focused specifically on digital. We have whole agencies specifically focused on traditional. But the fact of the matter is the end user, the end person, they don't care if it's digital or it's traditional. They don't care how they receive it. To them, it's just a piece of media. So we have to actually combine our digital and traditional methods because it is just about a piece of media. It is about your content being able to be shifted out into all of these different mechanisms so that both traditional and non-traditional have access to it. Because today we know that everything eventually will be digitized. So we have to start thinking about this today. Everything is eventually going to go this way. So how do we make sure that everything that we're creating has the potential to go this way? So as we see this, the traditional public relations model has changed. Traditionally, it's looked a little bit like this. We have our traditional news release that goes to the media filter, then goes to our audiences. But that has really changed today because today it looks a little bit more like this, where we have the ability of our news release that we can atomize content with that release. Videos, photos, infographics, data, information that now we can bypass that media filter and go directly to that audience. And what do we hope that audience does with it? We hope that they push that content on. It's this idea of push and pull. We are used to pushing content out, but we have to create content in a way that makes it easier for people to pull down. And guess what? That doesn't work in an email box today. Traditional email distribution doesn't work that way. It's one-to-one. And yes, that's one-to-one, but let me ask you, how often do you get an email that you just don't look at right away, or that you never look at? So we have to think about making our content available for search, making our content available online. And as we see this, this is the problem today with our modern content and our corporations. Yes, I know, this is not here in Sweden, right? This is probably on an American beach, probably. But the problem is that today, this is the push, this is the pull, but our content is kind of stuck there on the chair. Think about that person as like a big fat PDF file. You know, the search engine spiders can't really get to that content that's deep in it. You can't really move that content. The only way that you can get to that content is by downloading that content. And how many people really want to download a PDF file if they're in a rush, let alone if they're on a slow connection? So what we're seeing happen is this emerging media landscape is really shifting and changing. And we've got from user-generated to editorial, consumer to business. And believe it or not, there is such thing as user-generated business media. Things like StockTwits, LinkedIn, Zings, etc. We see these different things that are happening, but if this landscape is going to continue to shift and change, and it's not going to be static, then we can't afford to be static either. So what we see happening is the traditional roles of public relations, marketing, investor relations, advertising, all coming into one. We all have to communicate together. Sometimes the message changes slightly, but we always have to be on message. It gives us more access to the consumers, whoever our consumer is, more opportunities and better opportunities to engage with them. And also, because everything is online, there you get the lovely discussion about analytics and ROI, because everything can be measurable. However, everything is measurable, but it's only measurable to how we personally define measurement and how we define our success. Now, for a quick second, I also want to discuss continuous messaging that's easy to share. That's a really important factor. Today in modern marketing, there is a common euphemism for this phrase. I'm going to see if you can guess what it is. Traditionally, or at least over the last few years, a number of marketers, they'll have somebody in their organization say, I have this piece of content. Can you help make this content go viral? There it is, viral. That dirty word. It's a really dirty word. I really dislike the word viral. How many of you have ever had somebody come to you and say, can you make this content go viral? All right, let's think about this for a second. 5 years ago, if somebody said something was viral, what did you do? You ran in the opposite direction. You didn't want to catch it. You know, is there any such thing as a good virus? I'm not quite sure that there is. Probably somewhere along the way there is. But you didn't want to catch it. We can never promise to make content go viral. The best that we can do is promise or try to make content engaging, and make content engaging and shareable. We should strive to create shareable content and content that people would want to share. So the next time somebody comes to you and says, can you make this go viral? Say, no, but we can make it shareable. And I was in New York a couple of months ago, and I saw a gentleman speak, and he made a statement, and I said, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm stealing that statement. He said, go ahead. And he said, basically, every time a marketer uses the word viral, a kitten dies. So, please, save the kittens. Stop with viral. We want to create shareable content. So as we think about creating shareable content, we want to tell stories, right? We are today's modern storytellers. And everyone loves a good story, right? But guess what? People don't just like a good story. People like a true story. Think about those true stories that happen. Those are much more touching than any story that we can make up. A true story that tells real facts, real figures. And guess what? Even if you work at a software integration company, you can actually make a true story sound good. That's the talent that we have as marketers, is to be able to tell and take that story and make it a good story. But that true story, that's a major point, because today trust is really important, especially online. Trust, we don't want people just to trust, but we want people to trust us. And in thinking about trust, we really need to consider that today trust will become the currency over attention. Trust is such an important currency today. Going back to thinking about, email marketing for a second, how many of you have ever received or signed up for an e-newsletter? Okay. Now, of those who raised your hand say, yes, I've signed up for an e-newsletter, how many of you just out of curiosity have created e-newsletters? Okay, great. Well, think to yourselves for a second, how many of you have subscribed to an e-newsletter that comes into your email box that now is pretty much on auto-delete? All right, there we go, on auto-delete. Now let's examine, why did that happen? Somewhere along the way, we signed up for an e-newsletter. We thought it was going to be content that was relevant to us, but somehow it became not so relevant. Somehow they lost our trust that the content that they were giving to us was of good value. So as they lost that relevancy, they lost our trust, but they haven't quite lost our trust completely because we haven't unsubscribed yet. But we probably will at some point. So that trust factor is really important. And so if you're sending out emails and you've lost someone's trust, what happens to that? That goes right into auto-delete. So before I worked for PR Newswire, I actually worked for the online news hour at PBS in the States. And there I was doing reporting and research. And I received all kinds of emails from PR and marketing folks. And guess what? Most of them got deleted because they weren't on target. It didn't matter to me. In fact, our fax machine used to feed directly into the garbage can. And I was like, why do we even bother giving that number out? Because we need something to give when they call. Okay. Well, that didn't matter because what I looked at in the newsroom, I simply looked at our wire. And our wire had all kinds of information that came in. And I literally looked down our wire and I looked at the headlines. I didn't know who things were coming from, but I looked if the headline was pertinent to me. That's what mattered to me because I knew that system was designed specifically with my tastes in mind. Because I set it up, say this is what I'm covering, this is what matters to me. So I trusted that system and I trusted I was going to get the content that I wanted. In fact, in the States now, it's a very big trend that most journalists today have 2 to 4 email addresses. One of the ones that they just give out to everybody. The other one is for, their better contacts. And then there's their private contacts. So we see all of this happening. Trust is becoming so important that a journalist will trust that you're going to give them good content, so they'll give you a better way to contact them.